It's a well-known fact that racing games live on the Kinsey scale of human sexual orientation. At one end, you and your mates drive around in a candy-coated wonderland shooting weapons at each other, but in the other end, things get a little more serious and frankly a bit too heterosexual. You've got optimum driving lines and muscle cars and adjustable suspension, but you lose having any weapons, or frankly any friends. To me, the most fun, much like in sexual orientation, is to be found somewhere in the middle, and it's there that you find games like Burnout Takedown and this latest, Split Second Velocity. Split Second is set in a near-future reality TV show. You know the thing that movie makers and video game makers rely on to show a level of excess that would be impossible in any reasonable context. Actual reality shows in real life are dire prophecies of humans' impending cretinhood. They're like a visit from the ghost of fuckwit's future. But TV and game reality shows are tributes to extreme awesomeness. Think about games like Mad World or movies like The Running Man or Gamer. I'm sorry, don't think about Gamer. Split Second's overall structure should be familiar to anyone who's played this type of game before, and by that I refer to games like Blur and Project Gotham and the Burnout series especially, from which this one borrows heavily. The presentation here is slicker than a Louisiana pelican, and the graphics are brighter than a burning sea turtle. There's a bar, as there always is, and it's presented just underneath the car so you don't have to look away from the insane shit going on around you. The bar is filled by doing stupid, crazy things that endanger your life. The usual shtick. Jumping, close calls, eating service station food, drifting around corners and drafting behind cars. The bar fills through 3 sections, 2 blue sections and then 1 red section. In other games this would be some kind of speed boost, but in Split Second Velocity, we're beyond all that. The main aspect of the reality show shtick I mentioned before is the ability to trigger explosions and other traps that are positioned around the track in a way that would be incredibly tacky if the city was Baghdad. It's the bar that allows you to do this. The lower level of the traps are usually explosive-filled cars placed next to the tracks, and these explosions can cause damage if you're close enough, but more often a shockwave sends you careening into a barrier like royalty in Paris. You can see when to trigger them by these helpful icons here. Like the last 30 seconds of a porn film, being able to trigger an explosion on command doesn't necessarily guarantee that you can make it stick. Your opponents can and will avoid these explosions, which is probably just as well because you can do the same thing. It's one of the most satisfying parts of it, avoiding a fate that you know fully well you deserved. Or what I like to call pulling a Polanski. Trigger an explosive uses up 1 segment of your power bar, but it's when you fill the bar that reckless driving hits a 10 on the low-hand scale. The top-level power play is among the most excessive and stupid things I've seen in a video game. It probably goes without saying that stupid equals awesome. The sheer absurdity of the power plays defies belief. The first time you see them is intense. Dropping buildings on your adversaries, crashing planes onto the track. Taking out foes with a cruise ship is not something I realised was missing from my life until now. Power plays aren't limited to explosions though. In many games with weapons you find being at the front gives you nothing to do unless you can pick up some mines, but this is taken care of here. Power plays are also used to trigger shortcuts at the base level and massive track upheavals at the top. These course changes are so excessive they usually destroy cars as well, making them good for both improving your own racing line and taking out the guys behind you. Split Second offers a reasonable variety of race modes, but again it's the new things it offers that set it apart. One mode is survival mode. This is probably my favourite. It's quite simple. A series of trucks on a fairly simple track throw barrels at you like Donkey Kong on speed. The barrels are red and blue. The blue ones blow up and mess up your driving line, but the red ones blow up and mess up your face. Each truck you pass is a checkpoint. The system's simple, but it's surprisingly fun, especially when the trucks switch to entirely red barrels in an aptly named sudden death. Another mode that deserves mention is the helicopter modes. Basically you avoid incoming missiles to score, and in some modes you actually have to bounce the missiles back at the chopper. To be completely honest, it's not my favourite. I don't enjoy them very much at all, but it's an example of the excess and stupidity and at least willingness to try something new that makes Split Second really great. Split Second isn't perfect. It feels like the balance is a little bit wrong. For example, the drafting gives you heaps of power play bar, mostly for not coming first. Whereas drifting, which is actually quite challenging, gives you very little. The tracks get reused too much, so set-piece power plays get overused, and the in-the-beginning bullshit from the reality TV setting gets annoying and redundant. The crash physics are sometimes absurdly forgiving and probably a little bit too much. But worst of all, the title's punctuation doesn't make any sense. That is unforgivable. I have to admit, this is actually still not my favourite driving game. That title goes to the venerable and sublime Burnout Takedown on the original Xbox. It had a precision of driving that this one doesn't quite match, and I'm not quite sure how they let that down. But what it does do is make up for any lack with a degree of excess you won't find anywhere else in any other game. It makes it a lot of fun. You can't find more insane explosions without calling Mel Gibson. If you don't care about real cars and don't care about driving simulation, I could not recommend this highly enough.